Jujutsu Kaisen Season 3 Episode 8 was incredible in every sense of the word. From the overall direction and storyboards to the outstanding top-of-the-line 2D animation, it was a jaw-dropping display of artistry animated entirely by one guy, one key animator. That's right, as some of you may know, the newest episode of JJK was solo key animated by one Koki Fujimoto. He animated every single shot. I'll talk more about why that's an insane feat, especially for a production like JJK and what it means from a behind-the-scenes point of view in a bit. Back to the energetic intro, the episode, like I said, was amazing. We had eye-catching framing, mind-blowing animation, phenomenal drawings, and incredibly satisfying visual aesthetic. It checked all the right boxes. It was one of the best looking episodes from this show in my opinion, and as such, let's break down the visuals. Make sure to subscribe. That subscribe button looks the best when pressed and it helps out a lot. Come on, it takes a second, go down there and subscribe, just do it. You can also become a member of this channel. Members get at least 2 exclusive videos per month, custom badges and emojis, shoutouts and more. Just go down there and press the join button. As always, let's start with the staff list, and there's a lot worth talking about. The fact that this episode was directed and storyboarded by assistant director Yusuke Takeda, breaking series director Shota Goshizono's 7-episode long storyboarding streak, for example. While Goshizono not handling the storyboards for once doesn't surprise me. If anything, him storyboarding so many episodes was the real surprise. It still feels like a momentous occasion. I know Takeda stuck closely to Goshizono's directorial philosophy, so it's not like the show morphed into something completely different, but it's still definitely worth highlighting. Over on the animation side of things, we had one chief animation director, Yosuke Yajima, one animation director for the first time since season 1. Well, technically that Tengen Yap episode didn't have an AD credit, but I believe that's because the animators corrected their own shots, so it doesn't count. One AD for the first time since season 1, Yazi Lu, who I actually remember making his Sakuga Boru tag myself, a couple of assistant animation directors, and of course, one key animator, the aforementioned Koki Fujimoto. Let's start with the elephant in the room, solo key animation, a concept that always blows my mind, especially on this scale. The idea of one guy picking up a pen and animating an entire episode over 20 straight minutes all by himself is quite frankly ridiculous. Now yes, you can be pedantic about it. Yes, Koki Fujimoto didn't animate every single frame himself, there were in-between animators, but look, I'm not downplaying the significance of in-betweening, but when we talk about animation, we usually say this scene was animated by Yutaka Nakamura, not this scene was animated by Yutaka Nakamura and in-between animators, and that's for a reason. The key animator defines a shot. He or she draws all the key poses and decides how many in-betweens are needed and where, occasionally drawing actual in-between guides. They are the key animators, the creative force behind a shot. Also, for what it's worth, Koki Fujimoto was credited as an in-between animator as well. Back to the topic at hand, Koki Fujimoto animating this entire episode all by himself is, like I said, ridiculous, and that's doubly true given the sheer amount of movement. Again, I have trouble wrapping my head around the concept of an animator drawing so much and so well. Insane stuff. Now, what does all of that mean, you may ask? Why was this episode animated by one guy? Did they run out of animators? Were they saving resources? Well, no. What it means is that this episode was in the oven for a long time. Think about it, one guy animating 20 minutes of content will obviously take a lot longer than 10 or 20 guys doing the same. That's how things work. Plus, the episode had one CAD and one AD, usually the outcome of healthy conditions, and a justifiable number of second key animators. Justifiable because one guy drawing all of the layouts and a bunch of people cleaning them up is a production model that actually makes sense. It's a lot better than a bunch of guys drawing the layouts and a bunch of guys cleaning them up. Sure, some artists go even further, they animate an entire episode, correct it themselves, and handle the cleanup. Takeshi Minami Yaiba episode 6, what is wrong with you, are you clinically insane? But there's nothing wrong with requiring cleanup help when you've animated an entire episode, that's perfectly fine. Anyway, with all that being said, let's finally go through this episode. Let's start by talking about Koki Fujimoto. I think that'll help us unpack this episode better because, you know, he animated all of it. Fujimoto, as you could probably tell, is outstanding at animating human motion, at animating character movement. His ability to make seemingly mundane actions feel natural and fluid is so unbelievably high that I'd go as far as to say is one of the best character acting animators of our generation. He's phenomenal. The sheer amount of weight he packs into his animation is simply otherworldly. There's a reason why his animation often gets mistaken for CGI and or rotoscopy. Also, just for the record, nothing in this episode was rotoscoped, heavily referenced. Yes, this episode had a separate live-action reference credit, one of those references being Fujimoto himself, but not rotoscoped. Naturally, entrusting an artist like Fujimoto with an episode centered around character acting, and not just acting, but the realistic, weighty kind of acting, since this episode focused so much on human interactions and society, just made sense. Out of every single Jujutsu Kaisen episode, this was probably the best fit for a Koki Fujimoto solo key animation effort. Right from the get-go, you could feel the natural vibe of the animation, this ultra-wide-angle shot of Higurama, for example. Even though he is far away from the camera, meaning there are lesser lines to manipulate, making it harder to visualize the movement, Fujimoto conveyed so much weight and personality all via a back profile where Higurama takes up like 2% of the screen. You're watching a master at work, boys and girls, this is it. Similarly, this simple shot of Higurama tapping his pen had perfect weight control, the way the pen gets pushed down, the way the fingers recoil under the weight, the way the palm shifts back and forth, it's ridiculous. I won't go over every shot in as much detail, we'd be here for days, but I hope you understand my point. Fujimoto's acting animation is very perfect, if that makes sense. Throughout the course of this episode, Fujimoto swapped back and forth between subtle scenes like the ones I just talked about and more overtly in-your-face acting animation, and both styles were executed perfectly. These two shots, for example, he dialed up the bounce in the motion, they were still realistic and natural, but the movement was more noticeable in a good way, of course. Just look at this shot, look at the phenomenal volume control, look how consistent the character drawings are, look how alive the movement feels. Meticulous and methodical frame placements coupled with a fantastic understanding of human movement, absolutely incredible. I actually have a particularly strong sense of appreciation for this shot because it's a bit of a tangent, but it's my channel, f*** off. As some of you may know, I'm directing an indie animation project and I'm animating a few shots for it myself, and one of the shots I'm currently working on is very similar to this one. Character walks and then turns around, so I know firsthand how difficult shots like these are. Maybe not to Fujimoto because he is who he is, but for the rest of us mere mortals, it's insanely difficult. Moving on, I loved this shot. You know what's harder than animating natural looking movement for one character? Animating natural looking movement for 7 characters. Also really like how the character models break. Fujimoto basically drew an additional layer of shading and had the model be transparent beyond it. By the way, Fujimoto's natural acting isn't just limited to humans, even the cats are made to look realistic because of course they are. Also, quick shout out to the ground underneath the sky and the car interior in this shot for being cel, as in drawn by the animator, not the background artist. Before we move on, let's briefly address the concept of shorthand drawings. I believe that's what they're called, I'm not entirely sure. Basically, it's that thing where characters have less detail when they are further away from the camera, less detail in quotes, because a more appropriate definition would be less form. For this episode, Fujimoto utilized this blobby, abstract style of drawings with varying degrees of form. In most cases, he would omit facial features, especially the eyes, although in some shots he would make the entire body wobbly and stylized. Now, this isn't exactly a new concept, everyone does this, but the reason why I'm pointing it out is because Fujimoto never sacrificed the movement component. Even shots that looked like this, moved like this, I was particularly fond of this sequence. The character models were incredibly loose and deformed, but the movement was perfectly lifelike, creating this weird visual dichotomy that I loved. Also, this shot was insanely complex. You had multiple characters moving like their lives depended on it, that too in a spacious high-angle plane and away from the camera, which in case you couldn't tell, means Fujimoto had to animate multiple subtle perspective shifts. I think most casual viewers won't think much of shots like these, but they are incredibly difficult to animate, arguably more difficult than your standard flashy action scene. Now look, realistically I can't go over every impressive scene from this episode, the thing simply moved too much. Is this a still of these two sitting? No, because here comes a well-animated mother and daughter. This guy slapped the glass, but of course we can't just put hand.png on glasswindow.jpg and call it a day. We have to meticulously animate the weight behind the hand and the fingers pressing against the glass as a result. Just draw a close-up of Yuji climbing down the stairs? What are we, a normal anime? Of course, we'll painstakingly animate his entire body going down each step one by one, something that's notoriously difficult to do. You get the idea, right? This episode kept moving, the Koki Fujimoto character animation train was firing on all cylinders. There's only so much I can talk about. Pretty much every shot in this episode deserves its flowers, but from now on I'll focus more on the highlights. I hope you guys understand. Also, let's use this opportunity to talk about a few non-Koki Fujimoto talking points, the direction for example. Like I said earlier, this episode wasn't storyboarded by Shota Goshizono, but Yusuke Takeda stuck to his philosophies. Long, lingering shots, off-kilter compositions, you get the idea. Of course, the storyboards weren't as overtly eye-catching as the previous episodes, but they more than got the job done. You had these long shots with sporadic bursts of movement to keep the viewer engaged, you had layered, complex compositions, you have repetitive visual motifs, it was great. Besides that, episode 8 was one of, if not the most polished episode from this season. The drawings were top-notch thanks to Yajima and Lou's corrections, and despite featuring the largest amount of character acting animation so far, you could count on one hand the number of visible janks/melt. Thanks to Fujimoto's incredible craftsmanship, basically the animation end was pretty much perfect. The only real issue I had with this episode was some of the background work. Some of the BGs did look like low-res, hazy photographs. The previous episode had a similar issue, not a significant fault, but definitely worth mentioning. Anyway, let's get back to the breakdown. I loved this shot, there was so much going on. The two important characters in the distance occasionally moving, and the countless mob characters, vehicles and mob characters on vehicles moving past the screen, so many different things that had to be animated alongside the focus characters. Shortly afterwards, we got this really cool sequence. Obviously the walking animation was absolutely top-notch, but on top of that, the background was hand-animated. Crowds and backgrounds are the two most time-consuming things an animator can draw, and this episode featured both of them. This frame was really cool. I loved the individual blood vessels in the eyes, the well-defined shading adding form and volume to the face, and the metric ton of hatching, amazing stuff. Although the jump from the previous shot to this one was a bit abrupt and awkward, gave it a very government-mandated manga panel recreation vibe, if you know what I mean. I loved this scene. The force and desperation in Higurama's body language was conveyed through natural movement instead of exaggerated motion. It was truly remarkable. This was then followed by this shot where the entire room was hand animated. We started with a front profile, the camera then moved to the side with some heavy foreshortening and then backwards, turning into a low angle wide shot. And of course the background was animated accordingly, an insanely complex idea but executed perfectly. The next highlight was the fight scene, and it was preceded by more incredible acting. I know I said I'll skip over these scenes, but just look at this. This is character acting of the highest level. This is season finale quality, absolutely mind-blowing. Anyway, back to the fight. I loved how real it felt. Every motion, every run-up, every strike, the entire thing had a tremendous amount of weight. Even the more cartoonish exchanges were presented naturally. It's the kind of shit Chainsaw Man got raked over the coals for, and it was insane. A bunch of top-tier acting, both subdued and in your face, then brought us to the Higurama-Yuuji confrontation, and it was simply stellar. We started with some insanely polished drawings, some of the best of season 3, followed by this impressive rotation shot. Also loved the colors, especially in this shot. It was very over the top and in your face, but it didn't feel cheap or unnecessary. The red was actually really well implemented. Anyway, back to the animation. We got this gorgeous 3-tone liquid animation and this complex high-angle shot with top-notch shading. This was then followed by Higurama's reflection warping and distorting as Judgment popped up and more liquid effects. Really cool stuff. This shot was ridiculous. The camera tracked Higurama's legs and the entire background, the bathtub, the floor, the stairs, all of it was hand animated. It was then followed by more natural acting, and finally, after all of that, we got the domain scene with a complex camera zoom out and pan, liquid effects, lots of background animation, and these eerie but beautiful impact frames. This was then followed by these intense flashing lights, which I believe were added by the compositing team. Amazing work. And that was the episode. Again, absolutely insane. Hats off to Koki Fujimoto, he's a madman. Based on what I've heard, the remaining few episodes should be good, especially the last one, so I'm really looking forward to them. Of course, expect more JJK videos in the future. That's about it. A special thanks to Nude03, Amir, the Gallus90 and Shiki-san for becoming tier 3 members, and until next time.